Welcome back, friends. In today's session, we're going to start our topic of transport as our first topic in Form 6 Biology, according to our Tanzanian syllabus. Now, before discussing or before starting our topic, let us first give you an outline of the topic. So, in our topic of transport, we'll start by discussing introduction. So we'll have the first part, which is introduction, and then after introduction, second part will be transport in plants, and then after transport in plants, our third part will be transport in animals. So today we'll discuss only a small portion of introduction because things are many. So transport is one among the longest topic. I remember when I started transport in Form 6, I had acquired 3 counter book for notes, and I will be using my notes from my book which I used in my Form 6 studies. So if you need these notes, you can visit Kipaji app, and then you can buy these notes at very low cost, because according to the amount and the number of pages, the cost which they are sold is very small. So I'll be using my notes, and actually things are many. If we want to categorize them, things are many. But let me give you a short description of this topic. First, in part of introduction of this topic, in introduction we'll study the meaning and significance or importance of transport. So in introduction, which is part number 1, we'll start with the meaning and significance, meaning and importance or significance of studying transportation. Why do we start transportation? And then in the same part of introduction, this is just the introduction of introduction. Yani in the part of introduction to the topic of transportation, we have introduction. After having that introduction, we have the second part, which are mechanisms of transport. Now in mechanisms of transport, we have passive. The major 2 categories, they are passive, and the others, they are active. In the passive, we have 3 types. We have diffusion. In the passive, we have diffusion, and then in the passive we have osmosis, and in the passive we have mass flow. All of these will be discussed, mass flow. Also in the active transport yenyewe haina categories, labda tunaweza categorize kwa kuangalia zile transporters, kwamba zingine ni antiport, nyingine ni symport, but they are not of your level. So from there, by discussing all of these, we have tutakuwa tumemaliza part of introduction. However, there are many things which are included here, and it will not involve a single session because the session will be longer. Inaweza kachukua about 1 hour. So ili kuweza kufanya usichoke sana, it's better kama tukaigawa into many sessions ili kuweza ku easier your understanding. Like in the second part, in transport in plant, we'll first discuss about the plant-water relations. The concept of plasmolysis and turgidity. Plant-water relations, plasmolysis and turgidity. And from there, we'll move to plant tissues. In the plant tissues or simple plant tissues, we discuss about the xylem and the phloem. What are the components of xylem and components of phloem? We discuss different types of cells which are making them. And then later, after that, we discuss the movement of materials across the roots. And different forces which govern the movement of water in the roots. And from there, after discussing the movement of materials across the root and different forces which govern the movement of water across the root, we discuss about the translocation of water and mineral source from roots to to the reefs, and from there we'll discuss about the concept of stomata, then transpilation and deglutition, then translocation of manufactured food, that is translocation from the leaves to the roots or other parts of the plant. Here we discuss different theories and hypotheses which suggest the transportation of food materials from different parts of the plant to from leaves to other parts of the plant. We discuss about the difference, the evidence in the different mechanisms, the difference and the evidence for those mechanisms, evidence for translocation to occur in a phloem, and things like that. And from there we'll move to part 3 of our topic, which is transporting animals. In transporting animals, we discuss about blood and its function. After discussing about the blood and its function, we discuss about the types of circulation, and then we discuss about the fetal circulation and the changes which occur during birth. Then we'll end up, or we'll finish our discussion by discussing about the heart, the cardiac muscle, the adaptation of cardiac muscle, and different things about the heart and its myogenic nature of contracting itself. Now, in this session, let me finish up my session by discussing few concepts in our topic of transportation. So what we are saying ni kwamba transportation ni usafirishaji. So we are transporting different materials either within a cell or within a body from one point to another point of the body. So now transportation hapa tutadili sana na kutransport vitu kwenda other parts of the body, kwa sababu transport within a cell tulishaisoma kwenye nini, kwenye cytology. Kwa transport within a cell atadili nayo sana. Tadili na transport outside of the cell au across the cell membrane. Hizo ndo mechanism pia zinazotumika kwa transport, we must read them. So tunachokisema ni kwamba cell membranes are only about 7 micrometer wide, but they present barriers to movement of ions and molecules, particularly polar molecules which are water soluble, such as glucose and amino acids, that are repelled by non-polar hydrophobic lipids of membranes. As how we discussed in cytology that according to the fluid mosaic model, the size of the cell membrane is about only 7 micrometer, but it prevents the movement of water soluble molecules such as glucose and amino acids. This is because the nature of the cell membrane is made up of the phospholipid bilayer, and these phospholipids, as we are knowing that polar dissolve polar, the phospholipids, they are non-polar, so they can't allow the polar molecule to pass through them. Now, in order to allow the polar molecule to pass through the cell membrane, we have to apply another mechanism. We have to put the transport proteins, or we have to plug the proteins which will allow the transportation of the polar molecules. Now, this prevents the aqueous content of the cell from escaping. That means aqueous content of the cell from escaping. Tunapokuwa tuna vitu mle ndani, let's say water, glucose na vitu vingine, have escaped going out of the outside of the cell, because the cell membrane tend to prevent the escape of the aqueous content of the cell, kwa sababu it is non-polar and the aqueous content is polar. So in living organisms, materials has to be transported between living cell for a number of reasons. Third, the system of transportation of materials link up one cell and another. Kwenye living organism lazima transport material, kwa sababu tutahitaji kuchukua oxygen, then tutahitaji remove carbon dioxide, tutahitaji kuchukua nutrients, tutahitaji remove the end product of metabolism. So all of those processes, they require transportation. And if we don't transport the polar molecules across the cell membrane, that means we have to establish a certain mechanism ambayo itafanya cells ziweze kulink na kufanya vitu vyake inavyotakiwa. Now the reason for the need of transportation are the significances of transportation. Now by definition, transportation is the movement of materials within the body of an organism. Now these are the significances of transportation, and they are the reasons behind why do we need transportation. Why is transportation important in the body? What could happen if we couldn't have transportation in the body? So nachokisema ni kwamba first is the distribution of nutrients all over the body from the region of synthesis to the cells. So for example, in animals, we don't have the region of synthesis, but we have the region of absorption, which is from the gut to other parts of the body. The distribution of nutrients all over the body requires transportation system. And second is the removal of waste products from the body cell to outside of the body. So tunaposema, let's say tuna remove urea from, let's say, metabolism of proteins, tunapata amino acids in the liver, then tuna undergo olefin cycle. Olefin cycle tunapata nini? Tunapata urea. Urea must be transported in blood from the liver to the kidney. That means the removal of urea requires transportation mechanism in which we are transporting urea from where it is synthesized to the kidney to the organ which removes it outside of the body as urine. Now the third point is transportation of respiratory gases such as oxygen and carbon dioxide. This is very clear. We know about the transportation of carbon dioxide and oxygen as how we studied in our 4-5 biology, their mechanisms and things like that. Then the fourth point is distribution of secretions such as hormone from their secretory glands to their target organs. Kwa tunajua kwamba endocrine hormones such as hormones produced by the pituitary and main endocrine hormone, adrenalines, thyroxines, all of them they are transported by blood, and they are transported from one part of the body to other part through blood. So in absence of blood, they could not be able to be transported to different parts of the body. So that is one among the significance of transportation. Then the fifth point, it maintains a suitable pH and ionic concentration within the cell for enzyme activity. So suitable pH is because, for example, accumulation of carbon dioxide would combine with water to form weak carbonic acid, which when dissociated produces hydrogen ions, and the hydrogen ions could decrease the pH of the cell. If the pH of the cell could decrease, that means the enzyme could not work efficiently, and hence the enzyme can be denatured by the change in pH, and then cell finally will die. So transportation of carbon dioxide to the lungs for removal ensure the maintenance of pH, ensure maintenance of suitable pH and ionic concentration within the cell for enzyme activity, and hence the enzyme, they are not denatured, they work efficiently, and then at the end of the day the whole organism tend to survive. The sixth importance of transporting, it generates the ionic gradient essential for nervous and muscular activity. Ionic gradient essential for nervous and muscular activity. So we know that the nervous tissue, one among the characteristics of nervous tissue is that they are excitable. Even the muscular tissue, they are excitable. If we reach in university, we study in physiology, we are calling them the excitable tissues, muscles and nervous tissues. So they have ability to become excited, and after a certain time they are becoming back to their resting potential. Now, for these tissues, the excitation depends in the ionic concentration. For example, in the nervous tissue, the entrance of the opening of the sodium gates and the entry of sodium ions is the reason behind which lead to the action potential to be produced, and hence the action potential will be propagated along the axon to other parts of the body. Also in the muscular tissue, the process of muscle contraction involve calcium ions, and not only calcium, even sodium and potassium in many muscles, for example in cardiac muscles which are myocytes. So what I want to say here that the contraction of muscles and the excitation of nerve tissues requires ions such as sodium, potassium and calcium. Now the maintenance of these ions by transport mechanism help the contraction of muscle and the excitation of nervous tissue to be easier. The last importance of transportation for our discussion here, but not the case of all things which you can read in the books, is about the distribution of antibodies throughout the body. Distribution of antibodies. Kwa hiyo hizi sio kwamba ndio importance zote za transportation. tumediscuss chache. You can visit the books, and then by visiting the books you can read further about different things regarding importance of transportation, transportation. Kwa hiyo hiyo tunakuwa tumepata introduction kidogo, a light about transportation. Now let's move to the part of movement of materials across the cell surface membrane. Movement of materials across the cell surface membrane. How the materials they are moving across the cell surface membrane. Now as we know kwamba tunavyokuwa tuna cell surface membrane is the part of the cell which control all types of movement across it. Kwa hiyo hapa tuta discuss different mechanisms ambazo tuta discuss kwenye cytology. Kile hapa ni kama kurudia tu kabla tuja move forward. So nasema kwamba in the following account, movement across the cell surface membrane will be discussed. Although similar movement occur across the membrane of all cell organelles within the cell, there are four basic mechanisms, namely diffusion, osmosis, active transport, and back transport, or endocytosis and exocytosis. So the endocytosis and the exocytosis, they have been discussed in cytology. They've been discussed in cytology. So here we discuss most often the three: diffusion, osmosis, and active transport, and their importance. So by starting with the diffusion, diffusion is the movement of molecules or ions from a region of the high concentration to a region of the low concentration down a diffusion gradient. Is the movement of molecules or ions from a region of the high concentration to a region of the low concentration down a diffusion gradient. So diffusion requires a gradient. That means it requires one side to be having high amount of molecules and then another side to have low amount of molecules. Some of the common examples, the diffusion process is passive, and it does not require energy and it happens spontaneously. So navyosema passive manake haihitaji energy. Some of the commonest examples of diffusion, ambayo kabisa nasema everyone ameshawahi kuencounter toka amezaliwa, ni speed of molecules of gases or volatile substance within a room or somewhere. Kwa speed ya zile molecule ndio inaita nini? Diffusion. Mfano rahisi ni kwamba, kwa mfano ukiwa umekaa darasani ukasikia mwanafunzi labda amejamba kwa sauti kubwa, bila shaka watu wataanza kukimbia na kusema why? Kwa sababu wanajua kwamba zile gas molecule zilizotokana na kule kujamba zitadiffuse. Zikidifuse zitawafikia wao, zikifika kwenye pua zao, zile sensory cells kwenye pua zitasensi na zitaona harufu mbaya. So that is the concept of diffusion. However, many people they do not know. So mtu akijamba, ile harufu mbaya ina spread all over the room because of diffusion of the gas molecule. Similar way, mtu akipiga perfume, unakuta wanafunzi, mwalimu fulani akiwa ni mkali sana shuleni, akipita sehemu akiwa na perfume yake, wanafunzi wanasema nimesikia perfume ya mwalimu fulani. It is because of the diffusion of molecules. That means closest ya ule mwalimu ilikuwa na high concentration of perfume molecules. Now the perfume molecules, they have been diffused from the closest of a teacher to the noise of students. So the movement of molecules, it is from the region of high concentration to the region of low concentration, or from the region of the high concentration to the region of the low concentration. Very important and a very easy diffusion. So diffusion is the movement of molecules from the region of the high concentration to the region of the low concentration. So if the volatile substance such as petroleum, alcohol, ether, and perfume are kept exposed or opened in a room, then it will spread all over the room. Kwa kama hujawahi kutumia perfume, hujawahi kumkuta mtu yote anatumia perfume, the easiest example ya diffusion ni mtu anavyojamba. Nadhani hiyo hakuna mtu ambaye hajawahi kutana nayo kwa counter, mtu amejamba na harufu yake unasikia nani kajamba hapa, hata kama amejamba fumes ya polepole nani kajamba hapa. It is because of diffusion of gas molecules. Now, if a bottle of perfume were open in a closed room, the perfume would eventually spread by diffusion until an equilibrium was reached, where the perfume was evenly spread throughout the room. This occurs by random motion of molecules, which is due to their kinetic energy. So kinetic energy of a molecule zinafanya random motion, and then at the end of the day, the molecules of perfume, they spread all over the room. Each type of molecule moves down its own diffusion gradient independent to the other molecule. That is the first example for diffusion. The second example of diffusion is oxygen diffuses from the lungs into the blood, while at the same time carbon dioxide diffuses in the opposite direction. This is the example which is taken from the living body. And if you listen to my lecture of gaseous exchange and respiration, I explained about this in detail. That how the carbon dioxide and oxygen, they tend to diffuse across the respiratory surfaces. Lakini what I'm saying in this session is not for you to go and visit my lecturers, but the important thing which I want to emphasize here is that tunapodiscuss diffusion au tunapodiscuss hizi movement, usifikiri kuwa ni movement ambazo tunaweza natokea mtu akijamba au perfume akipiga. No, they are the movement which are occurring in the living body. That's why even some of the examples they are taken from the living body. Kwa hiyo example ndio iko hivyo, tunavyokuwa tuna diffusion of oxygen and carbon dioxide in the alveoli. Lakini example ya tatu, a crystal of potassium permanganate. Potassium permanganate yenyewe inakuwa purple in color. Potassium permanganate inakuwa purple in color. Hata unavyoenda hospitali umeumia kidonda, unapewa GV, gentian violet, that is potassium permanganate. It contains potassium permanganate. So potassium permanganate is purple in color, like the color of gentian violet. Now if you take the crystal ni kama chembe kama vile ilivyo chumvi. Ukichukua crystal ya potassium permanganate ukaitumbukiza kwenye beaker au kwenye water, even not in a beaker, hata kama kwenye lita yako nyumbani, if you drop that crystal, then all of water changes its color to purple. Now why all of water changes its color to purple? Wakati you drop ile crystal at one point, it is because of the diffusion of particles of potassium permanganate in water. That means they may diffuse kutoka kwenye ile point ile drop kwenda kwenye all over the beaker, all over the liter or container ambayo umeweka maji. So nasema kwamba is dropped in a beaker filled up with water. In a meanwhile, the water of the beaker around this crystal become deep purple. Water of the beaker around this crystal become deep purple. And after some time, the whole water of the beaker become uniform purple color and the crystal is fully dissolved. Kwanza water ambayo iko jirani na ile crystal inakuwa purple, deep purple. Lakini baadaye unakuta as time goes, water yote inakuwa purple. It is because of the diffusion of the potassium permanganate molecules. Also, if sugar crystals are added to water, ukiongeza sukari kwenye maji, if sugar crystals are added to water and kept for some time, then water becomes sweet. Unakuta maji yamekuwa matamu. Why? Pale hata kama usipokoroga, usipomix, sio tu kwamba sugar imedissolve. No, it is because of the diffusion of particles of sugar to all over the water molecule. These examples prove that the gases may diffuse in other gases. Gases may diffuse in other gases. Yani kwa mfano oxygen ina diffuse kwenye carbon dioxide. The liquids may diffuse in the gases. Liquids may diffuse in the gases. Or other liquids, also solids, may diffuse in either gas or liquids. For example, potassium permanganate could diffuse kwenye water. That means solid ime diffuse kwenye liquids. Kwa hiyo hizo ni some few examples too. Now from there, let's discuss about the factors affecting the process of diffusion. Factors affecting the process of diffusion. I know hizi umeshawahi kuzisikia several times, factors affecting diffusion, lakini tunazirudia tu. First is concentration gradient, or we call it as diffusion gradient. Concentration gradient, or we call it as diffusion gradient. The greater the difference in concentration of substance between two regions, the higher the difference in concentration between two regions. Now, when we are saying concentration gradient, what do we mean? Let's say, for example, we have two sides. Let's say here we have our cell membrane, and from our cell membrane here we have two sides. Let's say this is outside of the cell and this is inside of the cell. Let's say materials, they are diffusing from this side into this side. Now, it depends on the concentration of materials. Let's say this concentration is C1 and here we have concentration is C2. It depends on the difference between these two concentrations. What is the difference? C1 minus C2. What is the answer to this? Because the difference in this concentration is the one which will lead to the faster rate of diffusion of this molecule across the cell surface membrane. So let's say, for example, if this difference C1 minus C2 is higher, that means the rate of diffusion will be higher. But if this difference is lower, that means the rate of diffusion will be lower. That is how we can explain the concept of the concentration gradient. The steep the concentration gradient, that is the steep or the higher the difference in concentration, the higher the rate of respiration. The higher the difference in concentration, the higher or the faster the rate of diffusion. So nachokisema ni kwamba, in other words, the smaller the difference in concentration of molecules between the two regions, the smaller the rate of diffusion. So concentration gradient, diffusion D, is direct proportional to difference in concentration. Or we call it concentration gradient. So some people, they can say diffusion D is direct proportional to change in concentration or concentration gradient between the two medium ambazo zinakuwa zina exchanges of materials. Kwa hivyo ndivyo ambapo ipo. For example, in the lungs, the steep diffusion gradient is maintained so as to ensure faster diffusion of gases by speeding up the flow of blood through the lungs or by breathing faster. Kwa unavyoona during exercise mtu anakuwa na breathe faster, it is because anapo breathe faster pale anakuwa anafanya process ambayo inakuwa inatoa carbon dioxide nje na oxygen ndani, na ina maintain steep concentration gradient. By maintaining the steep concentration gradient, hence the faster rate of respiration continues. From there, tunasema ni distance over which diffusion takes place. Distance. This is also one among the very important factors in diffusion. The distance, one among the very important factor in diffusion. Now, diffusion requires a very small distance. For example, if we have a membrane of this thickness, and then we have another membrane, let's say we have another membrane of this thickness. Let's try to show here the thickness of another membrane. Now let's say we have another membrane, let's say of this thickness. Let's say this is our second membrane. Let us increase the thickness of the membrane here so that you can understand this easier. So this is our first membrane and this is our second membrane. In our second membrane, the thickness is large. So if materials, they are to move from one side, let's say, to another side. If materials, they are required to move from one side to another in this second membrane, and here we have our first membrane. So let's say this is our first and this is our second membrane. In the first membrane, because the diffusion distance is smaller, the diffusion will be faster as compared with the second membrane. I hope you understand or you get this. Kwa sababu gani huku distance ni faster? I mean huku distance ni kubwa, so rate ya diffusion itakuwa ndogo kuliko huku distance ambako ni ndogo. Rate ya diffusion itakuwa kubwa. It is very easier kuweza kudiffuse kwa sababu it is very easy ya kuweza kudifuse kwa sababu molecule huku zinapita kwa urahisi. Huku zinapita kirahisi kwa sababu gani? Kwa sababu membrane ni nyembamba. So ninachokisema ni kwamba distance over which diffusion takes place, or diffusion distance, the shorter the distance between the region of substances, the higher the rate of diffusion. Now, rate of diffusion decreases rapidly with distance. It falls in proportion to the square of distance. It falls in proportion to the square of distance. So diffusion rate is inversely proportional to 1 over d square. It falls in proportion to the square of distance. So inakuwa ni hivi, inversely proportional to 1 over d square. Diffusion therefore only effective over short distances. Membranes are thin so that molecules or ions can diffuse rapidly through them. So that is the one among the reasons why the cell membrane and many membranes, they are thin in order to allow the diffusion of molecules through them. That is the second factor which affect the process of diffusion, the second factor. Now let's move to the third factor. Which affect the process of diffusion. In the first and second factor we didn't written numbers, but don't worry, our discussion tend to continue. Now our third factor is about the surface area of the structure, or membrane through which the diffusion process takes place. Now surface area ni tofauti na ile factor pili ya diffusion distance. Diffusion distance tulikuwa tunaangalia distance over which diffusion take place, lakini kwenye surface area hatuangalii tena diffusion distance, tunaangalia ni kama upana, how far kile kitu kinakuwa kimespread. Now tunasema kwamba the greater the surface area of membrane through which diffusion takes place, the greater the rate of diffusion. Such as microville increases the surface area of animal cell for absorption process. Microville zina increase surface area ya animal cell kwa ajili ya absorption process, So yeah, microville zinakuwa zina increase surface area. Lakini pia tuna different features. Kwa mfano tuna villi in small intestine, also in small intestine. Before microvilli we have villi, they are aligned with microvilli in the surface. So all of those ni kwa ajili ya ku increase surface area for diffusion. From there we have temperature. Temperature tunasema kwamba the higher the temperature, the faster the diffusion. Hiyo ni kwa sababu temperature increases the kinetic energy of diffusing molecules. Kwa kama ni gases, the kinetic energy tend to increase if the temperature increases. Number 5, the size and the nature of diffusing molecules. Tunavyokuwa tuna diffusing molecules ambazo ni large, that means the rate of diffusion will be slower. Why? Kwa sababu ni large. Lakini kama ni small diffusing molecules, that means they will diffuse faster. Lakini hiyo ni kwenye size. Kwenye nature inategemea molecules ni polar au non-polar. Polar molecules will diffuse faster in the polar environment. Lakini more especially kwa sababu tunazungumzia cell membrane, polar molecules zita diffuse slower tukicompare na non-polar. This is because the cell membrane is made up of non-polar fatty acid molecule. Or non-polar molecules diffuse faster as compared with polar. So small molecules diffuse faster than larger ones. Hiyo ni kwenye issue ya size. Fatty acid molecules diffuse more slowly through the membrane than water molecule. This is because fatty acid molecules are polar and they are repelled phospholipids in the cell membrane. Now here we are talking about the nature, in terms of nature of diffusing molecules. The polar molecule, they are repelled by the non-polar phospholipids or by the non-polar phospholipids in the membrane. Okay, from there, our factor number 6 is about the nature of structure in which diffusion occurs. Now, diffusion frequently takes place across epithelial layer. And the epithelial layer normally it is one cell, yani inakuwa ni simple, sio stratified, kwa sababu ikiwa stratified diffusion itakuwa very difficult. So it is either through epithelial layer or cell membrane. Variation in their structure may affect diffusion, such as the larger the membrane, the larger the number and size of pore in the structure, the greater the rate of diffusion. Tunavyokuwa tuna many pores, yani proteins ambazo zinapitisha hizo molecule, diffusion itakuwa ni kubwa. So the factors affecting the rate of diffusion of molecule across the membrane, they are summarized by the Fick's law. Fick's law states that the rate of diffusion through the membrane is directly proportional to the surface area of the membrane, direct proportional to the difference in concentration across the membrane, and inversely proportional to the thickness of the membrane. Direct proportional to the surface area, direct proportional to the concentration difference, and inversely proportional to the thickness. So you see here the rate is direct proportional to the surface area, change in concentration, and inversely proportional to the distance. This is what we call the Fick's law. Now let's see about the biological importance of diffusion. Why is diffusion important in the body? Because every kind of movement here, it is important in the body. If any movement would be not important, that means the cell could not perform such kind of movement because it has no any advantage. So every kind of movement it is important because it ensures different processes in the body to take place. There are a number of processes which are being carried out by living organisms, and they include the application of diffusion. Below are some of the significant applications of diffusion in living organisms. First, it is used in the absorption of useful nutrient from small intestine. Diffusion is used initially when concentration in the intestine is greater than that in the blood vessels, that is capillaries. But when concentration of end products in the blood is higher or exceed that in the intestine, then active transport is used. So diffusion is used, but also active transport is used. Don't get confused about this. The second point is that it is an essential process in the exchange of gases during respiration and photosynthesis. Very easy kwa sababu exchange of gases inategemea tu concentration gradient. Kuna high amount of gas huko ndiko ambako kuna low amount of gas huko ndiko ambako gas inakuwa inaenda. Kwenye high amount gas inatoka, kwenye low amount gas inakuwa inaenda. Hiyo ni gases exchange. Lakini ya tatu, transfer of transmitter substance across synapse. So baada ya fusion of calcium ions, then the release of neurotransmitter, and then the neurotransmitter, they are released to the synaptic cleft, the area between the presynaptic membrane and the postsynaptic membrane. So at the synaptic cleft, the neurotransmitter, they are transferring by diffusion. There is no any transport mechanism which transfer the neurotransmitter there, and it is made by God himself. Now that the transfer, for example, acetylcholine moves by diffusion from a presynaptic membrane to postsynaptic membrane, passing through the synaptic cleft. Hiyo ni mfano. Lakini pia kuna fragrance flowers or sweet scent. Unakuta harufu fulani ua linatoa harufu nzuri, sweet scent. Acha na yale ambayo yanatoa harufu kama mavi. Hapana, yale siyazungumzii, japo nayo yanafanya by diffusion. So don't get confused. Nayo yanafanya diffusion, lakini I am talking about good flowers which give them the sweet scent. So fragrance flowers or sweet scent emit from flowers and is spread in air by diffusion means, and this attract an insect to materialize pollination. Na unaweza kuuliza kwamba kwa nini plant nyingine zinatoa harufu mbaya kama mavi, kwa nini nyingine zinatoa harufu nzuri? Harufu nzuri ni kwa ajili ya attract insect, kwa ajili ya either pollination, au kama sio pollination, wengine ni kwa ajili ya more especially ni kwa ajili ya pollination, kwa sababu zinakuwa ni flowering. Hatuwezi kusema seed dispersal kwenye flower hatuwezi kuwa tuna seed mpaka immature. Lakini ile mimea inayotoa harufu mbaya kama mavi, unajua ni nini? Ile ni defensive mechanism ambayo mimea inatumia ili kwamba organism wengine wasije kuila au kuiharibu kwa namna yote. Kwa organism wakisikia ile harufu chafu anaona mti hata kwa ile namna ya kuona kinyaa, kuchukia, ile ni defensive mechanism kwa plant. Anakuwa safe siku nyingi, anakuwa hakatukati ovyo, lakini in condition ambazo kabisa unakuta kabisa kwamba mmea unatoa harufu nzuri, ni kwa ajili ya kuattract insect. From there tunasema kwamba it aid in transportation. Transportation is dependent on diffusion since it begin when water in leaf, transpiration. Sorry, it aid in transpiration. Transpiration ina depend moja kwa moja kwenye process ya diffusion. Transpiration ina depend moja kwa moja kwenye process ya diffusion. Now hapo tulipofika tumefanya session yetu longer, lakini I want to end up here, and in the next session I will continue with this introduction. I don't want to make you tiresome kwa sababu nitafanya kipindi kiwe very very long. So in the next session we discuss about osmosis, and after discussing about osmosis and its biological significance, then we will move to active transport and bulk transport, and then we can move to other discussion in the introduction to topic of transport. Let us say that thank you everybody, and later I wish you nice studies. If you need these notes, don't forget to visit the Kiku app in the Play Store. Don't forget to visit Kipaji app. Kipaji, it's not Kiku, it's Kipaji. Then download the application, log in, then search for Dr. Mlelwa transportation notes. You can get them. Thank you, and later I wish you nice studies. Thank you.